special edition of Ideas Radio, one of the few editions that we'll ever be making in English due to our guests and our reach. And today we have a very special guest, my own grandpa, the original Oglesby in Mexico and in Puebla, Ed Oglesby. Welcome.
I'm certainly glad to be here. We just finished the segment in Spanish, but we decided to take advantage of the fact that John and I both speak English to do an English version.
This is going to give us a chance to reach out and have an impact with more communities. Now, you've been here in Mexico for a while. Can you give us kind of a summary of your history with Mexico?
Mm-hmm. Well, I've always felt called here to Mexico, and 10 days after we married, I was in the Sierra of Baja California, sleeping under a tree while I built our cabin, and eventually built a youth camp there and dug a well. And so we know what it is to live without electricity, telephone, running water, drain, sewers, and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And we cooked with wood.
Built your own cabin, drove across a large swath of Central America.
I have driven from the northern border of Mexico. I've driven all the way to Panama.
Mm-hmm.
And I've driven in every state of Mexico except Aguascalientes.
Mm-hmm.
And Baja California Sur, I've visited only by air.
So it has been a long, storied, and interesting trajectory. You've seen Mexico through quite a few of its phases. 1956, you said, was the first time you came?
Yes, I visited the Sierra in Baja California at Christmas 1956.
It was only 39 years after the latest Mexican Constitution, or 49 years after the latest Mexican Constitution. Quite a lot has changed in those first 49 years from the latest Constitution, and then these last 60 years that you've been involved with missions and with Mexico and with travel. That means that you've managed to see how a lot of the things that we've done in this country have affected its development. The choices that we made are now choices that we're reaping.
Yes, I've been in Puebla since 1966 and seen many, many changes here. There was a population of just over 500,000 at that time, and now we know it's over 2.5 million. And so we've seen tremendous amount of change.
This was very much a sleepy city just 35 years ago.
Well, I remember when after 9 o'clock at night, there would be nobody on the street anywhere.
Mm-hmm. All businesses would be shut down from about 2 to 4 o'clock, the lunch hour, the siesta hour, so to speak. Didn't businesses used to have a special permit just to stay open during those times?
Well, when we originally came, there were no supermarkets like Walmart or even Aurrera.
Mm-hmm.
The law said they had to close minimum from 2 to 3:30,
mm-hmm.
but most closed from 1:30 to 4.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing was open. Then when the store started to stay open with the new supermarkets, during the lunchtime they had to cover up with a sheet all merchandise that was not food.
Mm-hmm.
And so...
now that evolution has had a lot to do with our work-life balance, our family life balance. The requirement to be shut during that time allowed people to pick up their kids from school, have a lunch with them, which wasn't going to be a TV dinner or a microwave dinner. This was a lunch that would have to be prepared and eaten at home generally. So there was a very family-oriented schedule back then. We've lost a lot of that.
Yes. Also, during the rainy season, you could set your watch by when the rain came, or vice versa. Every day at 1:30, start raining.
Mm-hmm.
Half an hour later, stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And so everybody tried to get home for lunch before it rained, and would go back to work after it stopped.
Mm-hmm. And so we've seen a lot of change. We've seen a lot of evolution of Mexico, Puebla, our local region. There's so many. We've been talking on this show a lot about innovation, about development, about a lot of these subjects. And there's a lot of causes, and there's a lot of factors, and there's a lot of reasons. But one of the important ones we keep coming back to has been education. And as you've seen Mexico go through so many different phases, what are some of these things that you've seen about Mexico's choices and investments in education that have led us to where we are today?
Well, basically, most of these years, there has been no requirement for teachers to show their competence.
Mm-hmm.
And while studying for a master's degree in international education, it was my privilege to visit the studios of the telesecundaria,
Mm-hmm.
the televised junior high school.
Mm-hmm.
And
Which is used in a lot of rural areas in Mexico where you can't get a teacher.
exactly. And the teachers' union there would not permit them to record the teaching. So it was always live
Mm.
because they wanted to keep their jobs.
Mm.
And I met a lady in the hall, and she tried to talk English to me. I couldn't understand what she was saying. A few minutes later, we went into the studio, and she was the English teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a real problem. I had a friend who studied out in the Totonac area of Veracruz, and he went to a teleprepa, televised high school. And he had a very low grade average. Here we grade on a 1 to 10,
Mm-hmm.
and he had a 6.7, and 6
Which
is
would
fake.
be a D minus or an F in most cases in the States.
Right. And so the teacher said, "How would you like to improve your grade average?" And she said, "If you will enroll in the folkloric dance class, I'll raise your average to 8."
It'd be like a B minus.
Just because he got into a different class, she changed his whole comp card, or what do we call it?
His
Cumulative.
entire his GPA.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that focus on just having on paper successes, right? We just need to graduate you. You just need to get out with a non-failing grade, and that'll show that this school and this union is continuing to provide the successful outcomes that we're looking for politically and et cetera.
Just in the last year or so, Mexico is copying the United States in something that I don't recommend, and that is nobody fails.
Mm-hmm.
You finish the school year, you go on to the next regardless of what you've learned.
I'm definitely not a fan of just passing people for passing's sake. I am a fan of helping people find what it is they're missing in education. I like using myself as an example with my students. If you were to believe the standardized testing and the standardized education, I'm in exactly the wrong career. My very worst personal skill set is in math and science. And my best personal skill sets are in language and communication. So I shouldn't be an engineer.
Be careful who's listening.
And yet, it's not about what I would get out of school or what the standardized testing would say. It's what I was choosing to do with my life. And thankfully, I had people involved in my life, my education, my preparation, that helped me to see that it isn't all just about my natural skills or what the standardized tests would say about me, but rather what I could choose to do, work harder than others might have had to, but still go out and find ways to reach those goals.
Well, Mexico certainly has a lot of room to expand and to improve, and it's too bad that of the control the teachers unions have over public education.
And this is not to say that we begrudge people having a decent job or a stable job or a well-paying job, but we've turned the union job into such a Byzantine, complex, and complicated process that people are more concerned about protecting that union spot than they are in being good at their jobs.
One thing that's good is that I'm not sure about the last 5 years. I just simply don't know the statistics. But before that, Mexico had one of the highest and best education systems in the third world. And getting schools out into the country, Mexico has done a superb job, even though the quality hasn't always been there. But at least they're doing it, and in many countries, that's non-existent.
We focused quite a bit on getting everybody a decent primary education. Where we seem to have failed quite a bit is in getting secondary and tertiary being college, specialties, grad schools, education out to the people. So we're here talking about Mexico, its history, its past, present, and perspectives for education. And we're doing this program every couple of weeks. We're very glad to have this opportunity to do this one special one-off here with Ideas Radio at U Radio Upayep. We're very glad to have you here visiting with us, and we'll be talking with you guys a little bit more after these commercial breaks. Thank you very much.
What have you heard about Mexico these days? We are the best hosts. Every year, over 23 million tourists visit Mexico, and even better, 80% of them always come back. We're green, first place in natural protected areas. Jacques Cousteau named the Sea of Cortez the aquarium of the world. Classy, 2 of the 30 best restaurants in the world are in Mexico City. And it's all happening in Mexico as we speak. Find out for yourself.
NutriTips informa. ¿Quieres combinar tu buena alimentación con ejercicio, pero no te da tiempo? Aquí te damos unos consejos de lo que puedes hacer. Hacer un ejercicio no requiere precisamente de mucho tiempo o dinero. En la organización y la decisión de hacer ejercicio está la clave para poder iniciar. Puedes practicar algo en casa como hacer abdominales, sentadillas o saltar la cuerda. Aprovecha cualquier oportunidad para ejercitarte. Por ejemplo, si tienes la opción de usar escaleras en lugar de elevador, atrévete y hazlo. Ahorra un transporte público cuando sabes que puedes caminar. Levántate un poco más temprano y sal a correr un rato. Te vas a sentir bien y con energía durante el día. No olvides alimentarte sanamente. Y recuerda, no hay mejor inversión que una buena alimentación.
Soy Luis Fernando Rodríguez. Tengo 23 años y acabo de graduarme como ingeniero en electrónica y comunicaciones en UPAEP. Disfruto el tiempo en familia, me gusta aprender idiomas y practico karate. Desde pequeño me apasiona la astronomía. Soñaba con investigar el espacio y las estrellas. Los años y la experiencia me llevaron a elegir una carrera más práctica, pero nunca dejé de lado este sueño. Cuando la NASA, a través de la Agencia Espacial Mexicana, puso en manos de UPAEP la misión de construir el nanosatélite Aztec-SAT-1, supe que el sentido de mi carrera apuntaba al espacio. Como parte del proyecto, colaboro en los equipos de electrónica y software de vuelo. Ha sido una experiencia transformadora. Es el proyecto de mi vida y UPAEP lo ha hecho posible. Con la guía de nuestros profesores, hemos superado minuciosas revisiones por parte de la NASA. El lanzamiento programado para octubre será un gran logro para la comunidad universitaria y para México. Esta experiencia me ha enseñado a trabajar en equipo y a ser un líder que predica con el ejemplo. En UPAEP aprendí a darle sentido a mi carrera y esto ha sido decisivo para alcanzar mis sueños. Para mí, ser UPAEP es dejar el alma en cada proyecto. Todo esto soy yo. Soy Luis Fernando y soy UPAEP.
Back here on Ideas Radio at U Radio UPAEP, where we've been talking with Ed Oglesby, the original Oglesby in Puebla, in Mexico, my own grandfather, missionary, pastor, grandfather, great-grandfather, father, lots of different jobs, entrepreneur, educator, teacher, boss here in Puebla. You've seen a little bit of everything. You've had a little bit to do with so many different kinds of developments in the area, and even out in the more rural regions. What are some of these bad habits that we've had educationally? What have they led to?
Well, I don't know if this is what you're asking about, but there are a lot of doctors, lawyers, engineers, architects driving taxis and Ubers because they don't really know their job well enough to qualify for performing their job they were trained for.
We also haven't built an economy that's able to accommodate a lot of these higher level jobs and positions. We continue to be a very divided economy. We were talking earlier, I talk about two different Mexicos, the rural and the urban one, but you were correct in pointing out it might be 3 or 4 different Mexicos. The very rural and segregated part of Mexico nearly that has almost feels like going to a different country when you go and visit. The
working class in the city.
Working,
And then you have the mid to high middle class people who have businesses or work for a big business, and a lot of them are very comfortable. But then we have in Mexico more billionaires in dollars per capita than almost any other country in the world.
Mexico is a wealthy country. That's one of those fantasies and fake realities that we tend to believe ourselves here, and that would be that we're poor or that we're not a wealthy nation. Mexico is an extremely wealthy nation. Depends on how you measure that wealth. Mexico is the 11th or the 15th wealthiest country on this planet, and yet that wealth is not applied in an effective manner to where most Mexicans are living as if they were living in these wealthy countries. The vast majority of Mexicans are undereducated, have very poor paying jobs. I was just working on a paper, the World Bank and the OECD, they estimate the average Mexican makes about $16,000 a year. Mexico, through its Social Security office, estimates that people who are employed full-time or with benefits and therefore legally employed make about $6,000 a year. It's $10,000 less, about only 42% of what the international community knows or thinks about Mexico. Whereas the median, the median wage in the States is many times higher. The per capita GDP is about 6 to 7 times higher in the States, but there's only 6-7 times higher, but the wages are much worse as far as that discrepancy is concerned.
I had a friend who was a graduate registered doctor and worked in a local hospital in the emergency room, and she worked 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, and she had the same income as our once-a-week maid, who worked half as many hours.
Mm-hmm. So we're talking about a situation where we're perpetuating cycles of poverty, a lack of development, and a lack of a future that's going to keep people investing in their country. Now, we were talking earlier about even the way that Mexico tends to refer to its agricultural sector. We tend to use a word that's more akin to peasants than to farmers in the way that word is actually employed. And this is the way that many of them end up having to live.
Actually, it's very close to the truth. And due to the ejido system, most of Mexico's farmers have 5 to 10 acres, and they raise just enough corn to make tortillas for their family for the whole year. And what they sell is sold very cheap. And so they don't have money for doctors, and they I know some who walk from their home or their house or their shack 45 minutes just to get to their field where they work, and there they do all the work by hand with a pointed stick or a machete, and they've been doing it the same for 500 years.
And we don't have really the time to go into the complexities of the ejido system, but thankfully we have a word in English that helps people understand the dire circumstances. This is not very far from the concept of sharecropping.
A little bit worse, but same idea.
So we've got an entire group of people. Our entire rural system is trapped in this bog from which it's very difficult to pull themselves out of.
I know people in the country, here the general public consider, that poor dumb worker out in the field. But the reality is these people are very intelligent, very smart, and can be creative if they have opportunity.
There's a great study, and I really wish I could remember the guy's name. They were talking about a lot of these prejudices we tend to have about poverty, people making bad choices or less than optimal choices. And these people argue that it's not so much a level of intelligence as it is a level of how much your life is filled with stress and trying to survive. And that the more that your life is filled to the brim with just working to survive, the less room there is for you to make these wonderfully intelligent and proactive choices that you would need to improve your lot in life. For a lot of these people, like you said, it's a year-to-year struggle just to survive, just to keep the farm going, just to grow enough food to not have to buy extra food over the year. And what little is left over, they get to sell. But I would like to point out that for as much as people might feel like they're so proud of themselves for investing in fair trade coffee or all of these other fun things that people like to point out in the States, think of how much you're paying for a cup of coffee as you drive to your local coffee shop in the States. The average farmer here, what they were paid for that coffee, if they were paid for the finished toasted product, We're talking about 5 cents.
Out of the $5 cost that you pay at a major chain of coffee.
5 cents. All right, and that's if they're doing all right. Okay? So one of the ways that we're going to get to break people out of this perpetual trap that we seem to have placed them in is going to be improving their education. But we're not going to do this by following the same old models that we followed all along. We were talking in the first segment about these tele-high schools and tele-junior highs. For a lot of people, that's still their reality. They're still watching these. I don't know if they're still live exclusively or if some of them are taped now. But for a lot of people, that was as much as the government was willing to invest in getting them educated.
The truth of the matter is that the government still maintains a separation of country and city.
Mm-hmm.
And when they do the national census, they'll ask questions. Do you eat white bread or tortillas? And do you wear shoes or sandals?
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't have to ask them, are you a country bumpkin?
Essentially a peasant.
Or are you in the city? And they could figure this out by the questions they ask on the census.
Mm-hmm. And to a very large degree, this separation of Mexico is one which must absolutely end. I view it as a kind of perverse reverse colonialism, this idolatry of original culture, right? We're going to work so hard to preserve the original culture way out in that little mountain village town. To me, is just a thinly veiled cover for, no, you live in poverty and I'll live comfortably out here. You know, it's...
Well, when I was first in Puebla, and we would, in those days, there was only one bank for every brand of banks downtown. And you go down and you still had to wait in line a little bit, but if you came to the bank and you had on a coat and tie, you would just walk in front of everybody else, and if there was a person at the window who didn't have a tie on, you could push them aside and say,
I'm important.
I'm important, and get treated.
You know, that's 50, 40 years ago. We've made some progress, but not enough.
I mean, I see guys wearing suits and ties, but it's a suit that's not clean, not in good shape, an unironed shirt.
Mm-hmm.
But he's got to have that tie on so that he gets treated with proper respect.
That's one of those things that I'll always be in severe opposition to. I think you'll find me in a tie once or twice a year because there's just no getting around it. But it becomes a costume that implies the need for respect. When in reality, because you're here, because you're another human being, because you have value as a person, that's why I should respect you. Not because of how you're dressed, not because of which city or country village you come from. And I think the only way that we get there is through an improved education, through letting people see the value in themselves and see the value in others. And this education is not limited to merely academic terms, right?
We need to teach people to think.
We need to teach people to think. We need to teach people to live congruently with their values. There's no sense in pretending to espouse values, in pretending to hold a series of values and beliefs, if these never make it out into your way of life.
The country has certain values that are visible, but they have other bad values that are not visible.
Mm-hmm.
And I can say that ever since I've been in Mexico for 60 years, what is on top of everything is corruption of one level or another. And when you change sexennials, the new president, whoever he is going to get rid of corruption. Well, he gets rid of the corruption of his enemies and puts in his own corruption. And we're seeing that happen today.
And these cycles can only be broken when people start seeing and start understanding these cycles, start understanding the causes, and start really believing in the value that they themselves hold as people and as citizens. That only comes through education, both at home and in the school.
That's very true, and I think we'll probably touch more on it later. But what is destroying education, and as far as I'm concerned, is destroying our world, is the breakdown of the family. And in my family, even here in Mexico, we would always eat our meals together as a family.
Mm-hmm.
And now nobody eats as a family except maybe on Sunday, maybe.
We were talking in the last segment about the lunch hour in all businesses. You know, that was specifically designed to include the ability to go get your kids from school, have a meal together at home, make sure that everybody got everything done they needed to do together as a family in the middle of the day with the kids, and then you went back to work.
Yes, it was actually law back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that businesses had to close their doors from 2 to 3:30. And only grocery stores could stay open. And if they sold things that were not groceries, they had to cover them up with a sheet during the lunch hour.
Mm-hmm. We're just a few feet away from where I used to come spend some lunch hours with my parents. Dad would take some time off from work, and he'd come swim in the pool in the Alpha Club that used to be next door as he was working on recovery from a back surgery. And we would have a picnic lunch out here. And that all happened for me right after school. Mom would go get me on the bus. Dad would meet us here, and we'd have a family picnic and moment. And Dad would work on his rehab, and he'd be able to then get himself back to work. There was time to get that done.
When he's working for me.
And that was when he was working for you, right?
Yes.
And but that used to be the way that most jobs were handled. If you were in a decent job, at least. Now Mexico works the greatest number of hours per week per employee of any of the developed nations in the world, up to 800 hours more a year than workers in Germany, and 250 hours more a year than the average wealthy nation, and we're paid the least. So we've somehow gotten people trapped into this perpetual cycle where work is surpassing people's ability to spend time with family, because it becomes more important to have that stable or solid job where you're going to be able to keep your family fed and your kids in school. And things need to change in order for that to change back again in the country. So we've been talking a lot about the history of Mexico. We've been talking about our development. We've been talking about education. We've been talking about the separation of Mexico into regions. And when we come back from this next break, we're going to be talking a little bit about your vision for investing some more into doing some of this educational stuff a little bit differently in Mexico.
I have a friend right now who works in a textile factory. He works 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and does not get paid overtime.
Yep, which is a very common result for many Mexicans. We'll be seeing you guys after this break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about what's next for Mexico.
Escúchanos todos los miércoles de 3 a 4 de la tarde por Puebla FM. UPAED presenta
Vida de Estudiambre presenta un espacio cultural.
En el centro histórico de la ciudad de Puebla se encuentra San Pedro, Museo de Arte, el cual, a través del tiempo, ha sufrido drásticos cambios. A finales del siglo XIX fue creado para funcionar como hospital colaborador de ciencia médica, para después convertirse en el Hospital General del Estado hasta su total abandono. Rodeado por historias de terror, en 1988, este espacio fue designado para ser convertido en un museo, y en 2002 fue creado San Pedro, Museo de Arte. Cuenta con una exposición permanente que presenta un panorama de las etapas históricas del edificio. Ocasionalmente se presentan exposiciones temporales de temas modernos y contemporáneos. Visita San Pedro, Museo de Arte, y conoce la historia de Puebla.
Estudio la maestría en Ingeniería Ambiental y Desarrollo Sustentable en UPAEP. Soy un apasionado de la naturaleza. Me gusta el deporte, leer, asistir al teatro, jugar ajedrez y practicar yoga. Desde que entré a UPAEP he buscado emprender con causa. Mi proyecto de tesis es un trabajo con pepenadores. El objetivo es que mejoren sus condiciones de vida, para lo cual estoy desarrollando un modelo para que puedan aumentar sus ingresos a través de un centro de acopio. Mi meta es irme de intercambio y comparar este modelo con el de otros países, porque se ha demostrado que con este tipo de acciones los pepenadores logran salir adelante y mejoran considerablemente sus oportunidades. Quiero que mi existencia deje una huella positiva en el mundo. Mi historia comienza aquí. Soy David y soy UPAEP.
El sonido de lo natural está de vuelta. No te pierdas todos los martes en punto de las 13 horas tu programa BIOS. Con nuevas secciones, entrevistas, enlaces telefónicos, transmisiones en vivo y mucho más. BIOS, el sonido de lo natural está de vuelta. No te lo pierdas, todos los martes en punto de las 13 horas.
Where we are talking with Ed Oglesby about a lot of the past, present, and prospectives for future here in Mexico. We've talked about a lot of that past. We've talked about how that past has led to the present, which we're now living. But what is it that we can do differently to get to a more transformed and a better Mexico in the future?
Well, I feel that trying to deal with the public universities to change is essentially impossible. And in dealing with the public school system below university, they are so dominated by the unions that change is impossible. And one president tried that by installing modern video projectors and electronic whiteboards and all this in the 5th grade of every school, public school in Mexico, but without adequate training of the teachers. And after the first year, all the equipment was stolen and the program came to an end. So a wiser way to do it would have been to have selected a state or a city and changed the whole thing and have teachers that knew what they were doing. And so we feel there's a need to start a school system, I'll call it, that's publicly owned and run by families. And we'll have certain focuses that will prepare the kids for the world of the 21st century.
Now, in a lot of cases, people are very worried about whether they're getting prepared for the future simply by whether they have the right piece of paper
Yes, that's the situation here. Your sister who doesn't have the right piece of paper, and although she's doing a job far superior to somebody who had the piece of paper, and usually doesn't get paid for the knowledge and ability that she has.
Mm-hmm. And there are so many Mexicans trapped within that system. So what is it you guys are attempting to focus on differently?
Well, first, one other comment about that. There are millions of Mexicans trapped in their jobs because they don't want to give up their right to be indemnified when they leave.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I've got so many years here, and if I leave, I'll lose my rights. You know?
Mm-hmm. You'll lose the years that you've been saving up, that retirement and that indemnity and et cetera, et cetera. There are many companies that instead of investing in what in the States might be known as an IRA, they'll invest in a pension fund. But if you leave the company, you'll lose at least half of what was invested in the pension fund, since the company will not allow you to keep unvested the part which they've contributed to the fund, only the parts that you've contributed towards your own pension. So people end up stuck in jobs for 30 years because the first 10 or 15 years they were working the job just to support a family.
Yes, it's a very sad situation. We believe that we need to renew education philosophy and methodology and curriculum to prepare people for today's world. And unions and public schools don't want to do that. And so we're working on a education system that we are designing in such a way that it will multiply on I don't know if it'd be related to something like crowdsourcing, but that it self-perpetuates and requires very little capital. We believe that we must include things like STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and add on to that arts, because it takes art to apply all the technical stuff you learn. It's not useful if you don't have the art of putting it to work.
Mm-hmm.
We think there's a tremendous need to learn English because only a small fraction of the books that are written are translated into Spanish. Only the super popular ones, but the meaty ones, you better know how to read English or you're not going to be keeping up. By the time they get around to translating it to Spanish, it's obsolete. So we need to teach people to really know how to at least read English and be able to deal with it on the internet. We need a wider training of computer skills, coding or programming, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, the digital world in general. We need to place an emphasis on becoming I'll use the word professional technician rather than doctors, lawyers, engineers, and architects. There are thousands of them here in Puebla who simplemente don't have a job in their field. And they probably didn't learn it well anyway. And so that's got to be corrected. We need more people to understand how a business works, how to use social media correctly, to be involved in lifelong learning. I think you know that. You might want to tell them what you had to say about that.
Well, lifelong learning is one of those things that I ask my students about. What are their information consumption habits? And I use that phrase instead of what is your what are your study habits, because they tend to get a little defensive. But you have to have a process of continuously looking for, absorbing, and synthesizing new information. I use myself as an example. If you were to trust in standardized testing and skill sets, well then, like we said, I shouldn't be an engineer. My math and science skills are my worst natural skills, and I've had to work harder to get them up to speed. But it's something you can choose to do for yourself. You can choose to work on those things where you need to be challenged, and you can choose to take those challenges on, and then you can choose to do everything that you need to have success with those challenges. But you can only do that by becoming a lifelong learner. Learning has to become a part of your daily habit, not something that you do just for a little while and then you're free.
I'm always reading at least 2 or 3 different books on Kindle, because I have 1,000 books in my home, and there's not room for more. So all the new acquisitions are e-versions. And I always have my phone with me, and I have a library of 300 books in my phone that I can do research or pass time wherever I am. I think something important that we need to look at is, if you want to know really where Mexico stands in education, the Mexican government makes a survey every year of education individually in each state and a few of the major cities. And they score the state as well as the local entities on a scale of 1 to 100. States like Nuevo León, Jalisco, the DF, Estado de Mexico, Puebla, usually run between 55 and 65, which is really pretty low.
That would be a failing grade.
And those are the best. Oaxaca drops down to 15. So how are we going to progress? And in Oaxaca, with the teacher strikes, the kids only go to school half a year. And then with a teacher who's so mad that they're not really teaching. So this needs to be an impulse to us to improve education. I personally, as a pastor, feel that nobody's going to really be a success if there has not been a spiritual transformation in their life.
We were talking about that a little bit earlier. Any true change begins with the individual, and no true change is possible as long as we haven't learned how to be congruent in the way we live our lives and the way we claim we want to live our lives. This congruence between our stated and claimed values and the way we actually carry these values out, that's a learning process. And that is also a lifelong process. It's not something you do once.
In order to really get ahead, one has to have a correct worldview. And if your worldview is based on erroneous things, political, you're not going to go anywhere. But if you have a proper worldview that has a solid base, then you can go forward. We require spiritual power in our life. And there's a thing we call discipleship, and I think it works both in the secular world as well as the spiritual world. I think, John, you've had discipleship in your students, right?
We use a much more secular word called apprentice and mentorship.
Okay, same idea.
It's the same idea. In fact, I was just listening to one of these high-powered Harvard Business Review speakers yesterday. So these are people at the top of their game worldwide that are invited by Harvard to be a part of its business review world. And the guy was talking about advanced learning and how to learn extremely quickly and how to learn things that you might not have felt you could learn yourself. And one of the points he made at the end is one which I think would not surprise anybody in your world and in this kind of plan that you're trying to put together. Ancient methods of apprenticeship are probably many times more effective than mass classroom experiences like we have now.
I'm in full agreement. I have a student that I'm mentoring who's from the mountain area of Puebla, Veracruz, and took him to a conference recently, and he just soaks it in. And someday he's going to be a great leader in the area where we work.
Mm-hmm.
And we also need to work about our lifestyle. And we have to be careful what habits we developed. And there are habits being developed with drugs and vaping and that are ruining the lives of our young people. And so we need to take care of our lifestyle in order to be able to carry out the responsibilities that we have.
Well, going back to something you'd mentioned earlier, frequently a healthy lifestyle like that requires a healthy support system. And those healthy support systems tend to be the families. We have slowly dismantled access to a good support system for most people. And that's one of those things that we need to work stridently to rebuild if we're wanting to see a different future.
When you have an economy here that is basically manipulated by the narcos, the drug traffickers, they're calling the shots rather than the government in many localities. And so if we have family values, we tend to keep young people out of those activities that are so ruinous to their lives.
So we're looking for a transformed Mexico, which can help lead to a transformed world. You guys are doing a lot of this work. The website is still under construction, but you can find it at fuerza.org, fuersa.org. You might not find a lot of information yet, but you'll at least be able to find the contact information. Thank you for coming and spending some of this time with us talking about Mexico's past, present, and future. Yeah.
This has been a real privilege to be here, and gracias por soportar el inglés para este segmento.
Thank you very much for helping us get some of this message out there. We look forward to having you listen, if you can, listen to this in both the Spanish and the English segments, as they were not carbon copies of each other.
Exactly, they're very different.
And we look forward to having more of these conversations and a truly transformed Mexico. Thank you for being a part of Ideas. Follow us on everything that we're doing on social media. Facebook, Ideas Upaep. Ideas is with a double I, IIDEAS. Twitter, Ideas_MX. Instagram, Ideas_Upaep. Ideas.org.mx. And also on YouTube, you can find us as Ideas Upaep. We look forward to seeing you guys again in a couple of weeks. Thank you very much.